Hello, everyone. My name's Debbie Evans from UK Column. I'm the nursing correspondent. And as you all know, I have been absolutely determined to get some answers for those that are suffering vaccine injuries. And I'm delighted this afternoon to be able to welcome Adam Rowland. Adam has been suffering from severe adverse reactions since having the vaccination in January 2021. Today, he's going to tell his story. And quite honestly, if it doesn't move all of you that are watching, I don't know what will. Adam has had the most horrific experience. But as I introduce Adam, I want to remind also everybody watching that many of these people with vaccine injuries are extremely young, fit, healthy people who have got no medical histories to speak of in the past. So, with that, I'm going to hand over to Adam, who's going to tell us who he is and how he's come to contact UK Column. Adam, welcome.
Hiya, Debbie. Really pleased to be here and really grateful for you for having me on. Obviously, I'm not just speaking on behalf of myself today, speaking on behalf of everybody who's been affected by the vaccine, who's been injured, because there's an awful lot of us out there, Debbie, that are just not being heard and we're being ignored by the government. We're not getting an NHS care, and quite frankly, it's a horrendous nightmare that I wouldn't have wished on anybody. So yeah, it's because of what's happened to me, Debbie. I'm just really keen to speak out and raise awareness because it's got to stop. It's got to stop.
And Adam, let's tell everybody that who you are, because you are a very fit athlete, or were a very fit athlete. You've been cycling all your life. Athletics has been your life. Sport has been your life. And of course, you reached the pinnacle of a career in sports physiotherapy with huge clubs, sports clubs. Tell us a little bit about that and, what you were doing before you had the injection.
Yeah, Debbie. So ever since being a kid, really, just like many boys and girls up and down the country, I've done sport, all my life. Literally from secondary school, every single day of my life. And then obviously finishing school, still carrying on with the sports socially, cycling, rugby, and obviously looking after myself, sort of going to the gym, etc. Um, and then basically what happened, obviously, because I was so interested in my sport and always been involved in sport, unfortunately, I was never gifted enough to be a professional sports person. I decided to go down the next best route and train to be a physiotherapist, a strength and conditioning specialist, and was lucky enough to work in professional sport for the last 20 years of my life, working within professional ballet to begin with, believe it or not. Then did a little bit of stuff in professional football. Then majority of my career has been in professional rugby league. Lucky enough to work for and represent my country, so England in rugby league. And also fortunate enough as well to work with the military, so all the forces in this country, working on regional rehabilitation units for the injured servicemen in this country. So, very privileged to do that. And I also worked on a operational base overseas, where operations are going on for the military over there. So again, really enjoyed that. And then latterly, I was working in the USA and all over the world with some high-profile PGA golfers. So again, very fortunate. My job was my dream, if you like. It wasn't work to me; it was my passion, and I was lucky enough to be able to do that for 20 years, up until getting this vaccination.
And I think you're underselling yourself there, actually, because, Adam, viewers won't know that we've had long Zoom conversations about your story. And I know that you've done emergency courses with the Royal College of Surgeons, you're postgraduate and strength and conditioning specialist. You have all sorts of postgraduate qualifications. So you're extremely highly qualified and you really were at the pinnacle of your career. And since having the injection, which we'll come on to in a minute, we need to say to people that you've actually lost everything. You've lost your home. You've sadly lost your wife. You're estranged from your wife now. You've lost your dignity. This is a very difficult interview for you to do because you've always been extremely fit. You haven't had to ask for help from anybody. And now you've had to move back in with your mum, where your mum is a full-time carer for you. So the trust in the system has disappeared and your life has literally collapsed around your ears almost overnight. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Debbie. I mean, the words that you use to describe it are all right, but it doesn't tell you the day-to-day torture and hell and the emotional devastation that it's done not on myself, but my family. So yeah, I was super fit. My resting heart rate was 38 beats per minute. I was the fittest I'd ever been in my life. All the way through, just getting fitter and fitter. People thought I was a lot younger for my age, was fitter than most of the athletes I was looking after. And then yeah, I get the vaccinations, and then I immediately start to get health trouble off the back of that. And then as a result, um, you know, myself and my wife and my daughter. So I've got two daughters and two stepchildren I brought up. But because of the loss of my wage, we've ended up losing the house that we had together. My wife and daughter in temporary accommodation, struggling to get another house. Struggling to be able to afford another house. My wife was working from home and she wasn't able to care for me and look after me, and it was too much of a strain on her because unfortunately during all this, my wife's mother passed away as well, so that put a massive strain on things. Um, and she wasn't able to care for me. This last 12 months, I've spent 4 months in hospital and probably, I don't know, maybe 10 A&E visits. I can't tell you how many different consultants and doctors I've seen. I may be talking about 20 now, maybe. Um, but it's just been an absolute nightmare, and you just never imagine it would happen to you. And what's devastated me is, I'm a medical professional, um, and the contempt I've been treated with, and some of the words and stuff that have been said to me, is it's been really tough, Debbie. That other human beings who, in a caring medical profession, would say those things to me and treat me like this, and it's one of my motivations for coming on, because I want to turn I've lost everything now. I can't exercise. I can't even put my bin out at the end of my driveway because of my breathing and my chest pain. I can't do any of the things that people take for granted. I can't walk my dog. I've had to give my dog up to my wife. I can't take my grandson to the park and push him on the swings. Um, and for all that to be taken away and then be treated how we've been treated by the NHS and this government, it needs to stop, Debbie, and that's why I'm speaking out, because I want to turn this into a positive, and people need to speak out and tell the truth about what's going on, because our mainstream media, it's just absolutely criminal how they're treating us. It's criminal. It's disgusting. I would never treat another human being like this. I cannot tell you how badly that myself and we're all being treated. I cannot tell you. I can't describe it.
I have spoken to so many people with vaccine injuries, and they're all saying the same because at the end of the day, for whatever reason, and your reason for taking the injection was because you were looking after a very sick mother in law, and you were told that unless you took it, you would risk her health or her life. So that's why you took it. But I think now's a very poignant point to show our viewers what your life was like before you took the vaccine. So you very kindly sent in some photos of you with at the club and some video of when you were being interviewed on YouTube. And I know that you find this very difficult to watch and to look at, but I thank you for sharing it because I really think it's important that our viewers and listeners see who Adam Rowland was before the injection. So let's have a look now.
Adam Rowland, physiotherapist.
You still feeling jet lagged, Lucas?
Sorry, mate.
You still feeling jet lagged? Like you won a competition to be with us. Anyway.
What is the actual issue with them?
For example, if it was a muscle injury, a muscle overload, we call them sort of myofascial, sort of a low-grade overload. We'll be looking at hydration would be key for that, because if you're not hydrated, you know, the thought is that your muscles aren't as pliable and makes you more susceptible to those kind of injuries. All those markers look at stress to your system, to your whole body. So it's just showing us how your whole body is responding to load. So it could be, stress can come in many forms. It's not just the training stimulus, you know, it's whether you're not sleeping, it's the psychological pressures of playing and everything. It all fits into that. So although we look at like knee to wall as a range of movement thing, we're looking at the whole picture, you know, not just one thing in isolation. Post training again, I think it's always really important. Like, people just think you're standing there chatting on the same spot, watching the training session all day. But you know, obviously we do chat, but you know, you've got to get to learn to know your players inside out. You know, it's not only on the bed. You're watching how they move. You can see if they're sort of compensating in training. So we're watching exactly how they've been throughout the training session, seeing if they're struggling with any aspects of training. It might be deceleration, which could be quite a common one, acceleration or change of direction. And then following training, if we feel it's appropriate for them to fully train, which generally speaking, you know, they shouldn't be out there if they can't do the large majority of it. We'll look at how to best manage that injury for the next day. So for example, if it's something that's still slightly inflammatory, you know, we'll shut it down, we'll put ice on it, we might compress it, we can use stuff like the game readies and recovery pumps. There might even be some sort of not too deep soft tissue strategy, some like lymphatic drainage stuff to encourage the lymphatic system to get rid of all the inflammatory sort of debris around the injury site. Yeah, so it depends on the particular injury, really.
Okay, so Adam, let's get to the day that you went and had the vaccination. Now, as I understand it, you went to a vaccination centre and you walked in, and tell me, were you given any advice? Were you given any information? Were you given a vaccine leaflet, a patient information leaflet? Were you told of perhaps any side effects? Did you give a full medical history? What happened when you got to the vaccination centre?
Yeah, so looking back, it should have been, you know, alarm bells from the beginning, really. So the vaccination centre was, funnily enough, at the stadium where I used to work at with this professional sports team. They'd hired the stadium. It was absolute carnage. You know, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of people queuing up in multiple queues. You'd get shown upstairs, and then it was a room upstairs with about at the time. So you just sort of got ushered through. It sort of divided it. It was open, really, so there was no privacy, so there would be no medical, you know, there was no question about interviewing you for any past medical history or any medications that you're on. You know, as a medical practitioner, you know, you're taught, and you have to keep notes for legal reasons. You have to take someone's medical history. You know, you need a full subjective examination, you know, subjective history, sorry, before, you know, you give any intervention, especially if it's sort of a pharmaceutical one. But yeah, there was absolutely none of that. You just sat down in your chair, roll your sleeve up. I do remember asking them which vaccination it was, and they said to me it's AstraZeneca. So I said, well, have we got a choice in the matter? And they said, no, there's no choice. This is what you're having. And it was literally just roll your sleeve up, and they just, you know, put it in the arm. You know, it wasn't a doctor, it wasn't a nurse. You know, it was somebody who'd obviously been trained up to do these things. And it was literally giving you the vaccination. After the vaccination, they gave you a card with the number on, like a receipt for the batch number. I do remember that, I did keep that briefly. There was nothing about side effects or possible, injuries or adverse reactions. Didn't get any warning of that. And then basically they said to me, if you walk to the far end of the room, because it's like a big conference room, you'll be ushered off into a holding room, and you need to sit there for 15 minutes in case you have any adverse reactions. If you don't, then you're free to go, and that's exactly what happened.
So you went home and you felt fine until about 6 hours after, and then you weren't feeling so well. So what happened then?
Yeah, so I went home and just into the sort of tea time, early evening time it was, started to just shiver an awful lot, shiver more than probably I'd ever had in my lifetime. Maybe once when I'd had flu once, I'd compare it to that. So developed like this real high fever, and then it was literally in bed then for 4 days. All coats on, heating on full blast, just uncontrollable shivering in bed, is what happened. And then that subsided after about 4 days, and just felt like, post-virally, to be honest with you. As you would if I've only ever had flu once in my lifetime, funnily enough, and never really had any other experiences like it. So it was hard to compare. So felt virally and felt weak, and obviously, was working back in work. But then some strange things started to happen. Probably about, again, difficult to remember, but probably 10 days in, I noticed these things. But it was my wife that actually noticed, and obviously I did as well. Started to develop insomnia. It was like someone had turned a light switch off. So I was really struggling to get to sleep. And then as I was dropping off to sleep, when I was finally getting to sleep, because the insomnia sort of came after this, I started to, it's hard to describe because, I'm not, I don't think they're fits in the medical sense, but I started to develop fits, if you like, in bed. So I'd be dropping off to sleep and be asleep, and all of a sudden I'd start shaking my legs and arms about violently, and, obviously waking my wife up. And she was like, what are you doing? And yeah, all I remember is just waking up with horrendous pain down my left arm and my left leg, pains in my legs like nerve pain, or it was just horrendous. And then that carried on all the way. These episodes got more and more. So that was January 21, and then it happened all the way up to March, and it got to the point with March where I couldn't sleep. I was going 3, 4, and 5 days having 1 and 2 hours sleep a night. So it was beginning to really affect my work. And at this point, I had to phone up my bosses in work, which is really sort of embarrassing because in professional sport, you've got to have your arms and legs hanging off before you don't turn in for work, because you're, a senior member of the team, and, you've got the full playing squad relying on you. You can't just take time off work unless you're seriously ill. So, that's just to let the viewers sort of know that I wouldn't have ever took time off work. And it was really embarrassing for me. I hadn't taken time off work in over 10 years, a day off sick. So, it really affected me having to phone in. And I phoned in and I just said, I don't know what's going on with me. I said to my line manager, I said, I'm just going to have to take some time here. I said, I'm really struggling. Told them in my sleep and the fits. And then, I told them that I'd approached my GP about it and what my GP had said.
But the thing is, what I've noticed now is that nobody's really mentioning anything to do with the vaccine. So did you think that it could be to do with a side effect with the vaccine, or was it because people were saying to you, don't worry, it's anxiety, it's your imagination? When did the doctors start taking any notice of what you were saying, or at least investigate, or did they bother, in fact?
Oh, no, Debbie. So I think I made 2 phone calls to the GP. So at that time in the UK, I don't know how everyone else was locally, but you couldn't get a face-to-face appointment, because of the COVID. So it was a phone call, and it was like, oh, you've got panic attacks. They're panic attacks, those things that you're having at night. So I was like, right, okay, never had a panic attack, so it's hard for me to know what one is, and so I just yeah, I just believed what the GP said and thought, well, yeah, it's fine. It'll pass if it's a panic attack, because he didn't sound too worried. So why would I be worried? So again, that was like, around about March time. And then I had to phone him again because it was just getting worse and worse. Like I say, when you're having time off work, like, it's like seriously affecting you. So, he offered me like antidepressants at that time, and I think I briefly took them for about a week, and it made me horrendous. And I was just like, and I phoned him up and I just said, they're making me worse, these things. And then he tried to change them again or something like that, but it was all done over a telephone, and I wasn't comfortable with it really. So, I stopped these antidepressant drugs because I just felt like, I wasn't down or anything, so I couldn't really understand what it was really. But the GP was obviously still not seeing me at this point. So, you know, like anything, when my culture where I come from, and probably most people's in the UK, we're hardworking people, and you get an injury or something or a bit of an illness, and when you've always been fit and well, you expect to shake it off, if you like. So, I just thought it would be a bit like a cold or whatever. I just thought I was having a bit of a weird spell from a virus or something, and I'd be better in a few weeks. So, so I speaking to my work, and like I was so ill in reflection because they had to give me a phased returning to work over it was about 3 or 4 weeks, I think. In the end, it was, when I think back, it was ridiculous. So, I went back into work fully back in probably in about the April 21, and I just still wasn't right. I was still getting all these symptoms, but I was working and stuff, and I just blanked it out then um, until I got the second vaccination.
And there we go, jumping forward now to, I think it was May, wasn't it? So you had the first one in January, and despite having all of these illnesses and all of these unexplainable symptoms, the doctor's not worried. So fobbing you off with anxiety, depression. And obviously, you've got no explanation except for the fact that, you must just be having a bit of a weird few months, which kind of didn't give you any warning signs. So you went and had the second one. I think it was in May, am I right? And the adverse reactions that you got on the second one weren't as bad as the first one. I think they only lasted a couple of days.
Yeah, that's right, Debbie. So I got the second one in May 21, and I remember the day. So even though I said that I was ill, which I was still exercising at this point, and even though my performance exercise wise wasn't quite as good as it had been in the past, compared to what I am today, I was still. I remember being on the rowing machine, pumping weights and stuff, because I remember the day I went for the vaccination, I'd actually set a PB on the rowing machine in work. So I went for the second one, and then I had the same fever, but it wasn't as bad. I think I was bedbound for one day after the second vaccination. And then I just felt shivery for the next 2 weeks, I would say, 7 days to 2 weeks. But that's when, holy crap, if pardon my English, but that's when all hell broke loose at about the 10-day mark after the second injection.
You were still actually trying to convince yourself, weren't you, that you had been maybe overexerting yourself, or that you'd maybe pulled a muscle, or that, somehow there was another explanation. So still you were thinking, oh well, the doctors aren't worried, nobody seems to be worried, there's nothing to worry about. And then, as you say, things started to go horribly wrong. Tell us about the Sunday evening, Adam, because that's really when it all started, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was, Debbie, and I'll give you a little brief. I'll try and keep it brief before that. But I noticed that before that Sunday evening, after about 10 days, I started to notice chest pain, and again with the chest pain, it was felt like rib pain, like costochondritis. So obviously, I've treated a lot of rugby players and things like that. So rib injuries, it's sort of bread and butter. So I just thought, oh, it's inflammation on my ribs, and I thought, oh, I've overdone it at the gym. But I knew that my routine had actually made easier. I know how to moderate, exercise programs, and I've been making it easier because of my health. So I knew that that wasn't an explanation. And then I started to get stabbing pains in my chest, which was starting to get more concerning. So I'd actually been to A&E as well once in this time, and they told me it was an anxiety attack again at A&E. But then fast forward to the Sunday, and I'd actually had a moment in work where I'd sort of passed out in work briefly for a moment. So I'd sort of been all dizzy, had to sit down, didn't know what was going on. And then this was on the same Sunday after the game. I was at home, and literally all I remember is I was doing some work for the Monday, typing on my computer, and I went to stand up, and I just was incredibly dizzy, like, that's it, I'm going to pass out and collapse here. And the next minute I was just covered in sweat, horrendous pain, heart rate was just screaming. It was 170 through the roof, doing nothing, and I literally couldn't move, struggling to speak. And I thought I was having a heart attack. I'd never had anything like that in my life before. So my family had to call an ambulance.
What did they say? I mean, and I want to just go back a little bit, because we've already been told, you've already been told that you're suffering with panic attacks and depression. So now you've called an ambulance, all of these symptoms. Tell us what they said to you.
Yeah, well, it's quite horrific now, I know, but so I got taken in and obviously put on an ECG machine. And they did the standard checks. Debbie, as we both know what happens in the hospitals up and down the country. So they did an ECG, and on the ECG, they found that my heart was going into VT. So ventricular tachycardia is it's obviously quite a serious thing. And from that point, obviously they admitted me to the ACU, or the coronary care unit of the hospital, because it was potentially life-threatening at that point.
And what did they say to you? Because let's explain to our viewers, ventricular tachycardia is when one of the ventricles of the heart beats very, very fast. So tachycardia is very, very fast. But they called the cardiologist, didn't they? What did the cardiologist say to you?
Yeah, so they kept me in hospital for a week, called the cardiologist, and the cardiologist, it was a local hospital, so he was bamboozled. He said he thought it was Brugada syndrome because I was an athlete, because I had changes on my ECG that athletes have in the heart. I have an incredibly low resting heart rate, and because of that, they just automatically thought it's because I'm an athlete. He's got Brugada syndrome, which affects the conduction of your heart, and people can unfortunately drop dead on the field of play with it. So that's what they automatically assumed. But having said that, he sent my ECGs off to a specialist heart and lung hospital, the local one. And then in the meantime, they started to, it was horrendous. I was really worried. I was telling him I was really worried. And the guy started to tell me it was anxiety, and it was all in my head. And anxiety was causing it. So I remember having the conversation, because I was absolutely shocked. I was thinking, from my medical background, as far as I'm aware, that doesn't make any sense that anxiety could cause VT. So I actually one of the club cardiologists who comes into one of the clubs, I was actually in conversation with him on my mobile phone as I'm in a separate room on high dependency unit for my heart. And I texted him, and I said, look, Rich, I said, could VT be caused by anxiety? I said, they're telling me it's anxiety here. And he just laughed. He said, no, absolutely no way it could be caused by anxiety. So what happened was, they couldn't find the cause at the hospital, tried to bung me on, because I couldn't sleep at this point, because I was still having all the fits in bed. So every time I laid down, it was like I had vertigo, and this would trigger one of these little fits. So can you imagine, when you're not sleeping and now you've got chest pain and your heart's going into VT, I'm going to have a bit of anxiety, but I'm not sleeping for days. So this cardiology man's answer for it was, I'm going to prescribe you an antipsychotic to help you sleep, and came to me and tried to put me on an antipsychotic. I refused the medication. Since requested my notes from the hospital, and there's quite a frank conversation between him and another doctor an argument over whether they should prescribe it because of the risk, because of my heart at that moment in time. That this medication really shouldn't have even been considered to be prescribed. So yeah, they told me not to worry. They'd send me to Liverpool Heart and Chest Hospital, and I would get an appointment fairly soon. But they couldn't find a reason for this VT, and said, you're fine and go home and wait for this appointment.
So they sent you home again, Adam, and
Yeah.
you stayed at home. But am I right in thinking, and I can't remember whereabouts it was that it happened, but at some point someone did a D-dimer test, but they didn't tell you they'd done a D-dimer test because actually the D-dimer was raised, which was significant because this could indicate blood clots, but nobody told you that.
Yeah, that's correct. So yeah, while I was in hospital, I've only since found this out, Debbie, that I requested my notes after my awful experiences of recent. And when I looked on my notes, I had a very high D dimer, which I know is used as a blood clotting marker. So they were actually suspecting potentially blood clots on me at that time, but I didn't know about it.
Unbelievable. So all the time they're fobbing you off with either not giving you information that you should have had, which was crucial that you should have had, or they're telling you that it's in your head, it's a panic attack, or yes, we can see that you've got ventricular tachycardia, but sorry, we can't tell you why. So they're fobbing you off completely. And so because of the person that you are, and you're a proud man and you're an independent man, and you've always looked after yourself, and you've always respected your own body by looking after it, because that's why you're so fit. What I could not believe, and I know that our viewers and listeners are not going to believe either, but you did the unthinkable, something that I couldn't even begin to think of as an able-bodied person. You actually decided to test your body and you walked the 3 peaks.
Yeah, so what I did, Debbie, was I thought, well, these are cardiologists and, they're telling me there's nothing wrong. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, they wouldn't let me home with VT if it was serious, right? And they told me, it'll probably be about 8 weeks on the NHS. So what I did was, like, I'm a sports person, so, you have to get back as quickly as you can. And my life is, like I said, I'd be lucky if I took one day off of exercising, 40 years or 30 odd years. So, I paid privately to speed up to negate the NHS because I just wanted to get this, I just wanted to chalk a line through this thing and know what was going on. And I just thought, in the meantime, well, they've said my heart's all right. So it was a lovely summer's day. I looked at the forecast. So the next day I went and did the Yorkshire Three Peaks, which is the three highest peaks in Yorkshire. And I've done the National Three Peaks, and it's actually harder than the National Three Peaks. So yeah, I went and did that on my own. And I thought, well, it's not super strenuous, but it'll give me an idea of where my heart's at. So I thought, I'll go and do that, and I did it. To be fair, I probably only had one or two incidences of the VT, that short episodes while I was doing it, but I didn't push myself to my maximum as I normally would. But yeah, I thought I'll go and test it and see what it feels like. And I knew I wasn't right, but I got a little bit of confidence from that because obviously, it's quite strenuous.
Wow. I mean, all I can say is wow and huge admiration. And for viewers and listeners watching, because it was the first question I asked Adam, was how long did it take him? And it took him 10 hours for anybody that's wondering. So I want to jump forward now to August 2021. And in August, you were getting tinnitus, you were jaundiced, you had rashes, you had cramps in both calves, you had muscle cramps, vertigo. And in fact, this was the time where you actually had to stop driving because you'd been driving up until then. So that was August down the chute. And it was, and I remember you saying that on one occasion you looked at your watch and you couldn't read your watch. It was blurry.
Yeah, so that, when I think back, Debbie, that had been going on since like the July. I don't know exactly what date, but I've noticed that. Yeah, I can't read my watch, and I really struggle to read. I love reading. Read all my life. Again, I'd come home from work and I'd be studying more. Reading books for pleasure. I'm not really someone who watches TV. And I noticed that I was really blurred. So at that point, I actually I went and got my eyes tested twice at two different independent places. I paid for it was an extra 40 quid for some sort of scan, what they do behind the eyeballs now to look at the blood vessels. Because I'd never wore glasses in my life and my vision's always been absolutely perfect. And I was noticing all these real big blood vessels, like bloodshot eyes, but really prominent in my eyes. But they tested my eyes, and both of them couldn't really find anything, other than I couldn't read the stuff. But then glasses, their intervention wasn't helping, so it was kind of pretty weird.
The rest of 2021, I mean, we're talking now, September, October, and November. You're still going through all of these symptoms. And I believe the doctors are still telling you it's panic attacks. And at one point before Christmas, they were prescribing you a very strong antidepressant called venlafaxine, which made you feel a lot worse. So rather than going to the doctors and to A&E and to all of these consultants appointments to get help, you were being thrown pretty much everything, including the kitchen sink, because nobody really knew quite what to give you. But what you were being given was actually making you feel worse.
Yeah, so Debbie, I was really, really desperate. I cannot tell you mentally what I was going through at that stage. I'm going to be honest here for the viewers. And I remember being honest to my employers in work, because I got to the point where I had to resign from work because I wasn't capable of working anymore. And for me to resign from my job, I'd worked 20 years, Debbie, for this. For someone to resign, it was so hard for me to do, but I had to do it because I couldn't do my best, and it was my reputation, and I couldn't, I can't look after a bunch of professional athletes, so I had to resign. So I was literally suicidal at this point on a daily basis, because I was like, people are telling me there's nothing wrong with me. I'm like, what's going on? So, I was desperate to believe that there was nothing wrong with me, even though I knew that there was. And then, my GP again says antidepressants. I don't know what to do here. What can we do? I want to try and help you, but I don't know what to do. No one had mentioned vaccine injury at all. I hadn't even considered it. It was only sort of briefly after that. So, I tried these antidepressants for like 3 weeks, and it just made me even worse. And I was just like, I was so desperate, Debbie, honestly. My world was devastated because, I had to tell my wife that I resigned from work, and I didn't know what was going on. And I just thought, I told myself in my head that maybe if I take 2 weeks off work, it's a virus still, it's a virus, I'll get over it and I'll be able to go back to work. But just the fact to have to resign from my job because I wasn't physically and mentally up to it was it's just haunting me to this day, Debbie. It's just not right.
I just want to tell viewers and listeners that this morning, you and I both attended the MHRA board meeting. And I know that there have been a lot of comments about it from people I've heard already with anger. Because if Dame June Rain and the MHRA, Alison Cave, Dr. Henrietta Hughes are listening, this is absolutely abhorrent. You were passed around and continue to be passed around, because I just can't reiterate it enough. You have been an independent, highly skilled, highly qualified medical professional for decades. You've worked all your life. You have a family. You were raising a family. You've got a grandson, and your wish is all you want to do now, isn't it? Is push your grandson on a swing and to walk your dog that now your wife has to look after. Those are your two biggest ambitions. And this is from a man that's walked 3 peaks. I mean, Adam, as we go on, and let's carry on, because Christmas 2021 was particularly traumatic. I know you couldn't eat Christmas dinner. You were up and down, having to move all the time, because whichever position you put yourself in, it was uncomfortable. And the chest pains, I have to reiterate to everyone, these chest pains, these are absolutely excruciating. and they're continuous, and you were feeling ill continually. And this is when you started to ask questions, wasn't it? This is when you started to say, do you think it's the vaccine? What did your GP say to you over that question? Do you think it's the vaccine?
Yeah, I just got completely ignored. They didn't even answer it. It was like, obviously they'd heard it, but they just looked through me, like at the wall behind me. And then when I tried to make eye contact with them and look at them, they looked at the floor. But it was like I hadn't said the question. It was just, I don't know. It made me feel even more crazy, if you like. How that's what they thought of me. So it made me realise that genuinely that they thought I was mental or mentally ill or something, because I couldn't explain it any other way. It was disgusting.
And you just had to
Um,
keep on putting up with this, didn't you? You just had to keep on listening to this. They were they obfuscated you every step of the way. And then if we jump forward again to March, because I mean, remember all of this time is going past. You had the jab over a year ago by now, and still nobody's listening to you. Still nobody is hearing what you're saying or believing what you're saying. But then you got sent to a different hospital where you actually met some of the professionals that you worked with, didn't you? Within your
yeah.
sporting career, and that's when they were shocked and looked at you and said, "Adam, what has happened? What was that like to actually meet people that you knew at a hospital and to get that reaction?"
Well, it was interesting, Debbie, because I approached this hospital twice at A&E because I was in horrendous pain with my circulation in my legs at this point. I couldn't lie down for more than 3 hours. If I would fall to sleep, I'd wake up in horrendous pain and I'd be so fatigued, but I literally couldn't lie there because of the pain in my legs, and then I'd have to get up and try and get the circulation going. So I had to go to A&E, massive hospital. And to be honest, I don't know whether they saw my name and recognised it, one of my old colleagues from another professional sports team, but they got me in quite quickly at A&E and saw me quite quickly. And Andy spoke to me and said to me, "Do you want me to get?" He recognised me and said, "Oh, right." He said, "Do you want me to get someone else who doesn't know you to assess you?" He said, "Do you mind if it's me?" And I went, "No, I've got nothing to hide, Andy." I said, "I prefer if it is you, someone who knows me." So he assessed me. He was just absolutely shocked. He didn't realise, he knew it was me from my face, but he was like, "Oh my goodness, what's happened?" And I just told him, I just said, "I don't know what's happened." I said, I mentioned about this COVID vaccination. I said, "That's all I can think of." I'd lost 2.5 stone at this point in weight. My eyeballs were yellow, which you could see, face rashes all over my face. He was absolutely shocked. And then he said to me, right, he said, "We have standard procedures when people come in, that, what bloods we do and what tests we do." He said, I'll try and do a few extra ones, if you like, as a professional favour, if you know what I mean. And that's what he did. He suspected that I had peripheral neuropathy, and that's what my pain was, and suggested that I needed to see a neurologist in terms of those symptoms. But they were very sympathetic with me. But again, the treatment that they offered is very, very strong medications, and I didn't want to go on strong medications like that without knowing the actual cause. I just felt like treating the symptoms again a little bit. He wasn't fobbing me off, but that's how it felt like. It was like, well, no one's investigating me properly here before you start chucking heavy duty medications at me.
I think because I know, obviously, and I've spoken to you before and I know your story, I know what comes next, which I think is quite shocking. In that, when you did actually get to see the neurologist, because you were referred on to neurologist, the neurologist laughed at you, actually laughed in your face, and said something that you'll never forget with regards to the Gulf War. Tell us about that, Adam, because it's shocking.
Yeah, so Debbie, I was trying my best at this point to try and, how should we say, be reasonable and try and communicate, because I needed help off these people. So I saw one of the top professors in the country, actually, but it's certainly the top guy in my area, and I'd actually paid privately to see him previously to this appointment, but to get it done quicker. I eventually got this NHS appointment to see him, and I printed a load of stuff off about vaccination injury and evidence and various tests, like various blood tests that were starting to come up positive for people with vaccination injuries. So I went and I thought he'd treat me, like a medical professional, like he would be speaking to one of his colleagues. Because I have had that since with some colleagues, but I expected that of him. So I took all this information, went to the appointment, and he's saying, "How are you?" And I'm telling him how I am. And I said to him, "Look," I said, "I really think this is vaccination injury. Would you care to have a look at all this information that I've printed off and this sort of evidence? Would you care to read it? And what are your thoughts on it?" So he said, "Oh, thanks for doing that. Yeah, I'll read it." And then he just tossed it to the side of his desk and didn't read it. And then he said to me, "Yeah, it could well be vaccination injury." So I was a little bit enthused. I thought, he's going to listen to me here. And then his next sentence was, he went, but he said, "We still don't know what's caused Gulf War syndrome. And it's been like 30 years. So he said, we're not going to find out what's going on with you." And then just offered me, another long list of medications to treat pain and symptoms, and said he couldn't help me. So I was absolutely devastated.
So he said he couldn't help you, and the long list of medications that you were offered were anti-epileptics, antidepressants. That's what they were offering you. And another thing that came up also was that you weren't being told about some of the test results that you'd had done. And this was regards protein C and protein S, which would put you at high risk of clots. And nobody bothered to tell you that either, did they? I mean, everybody just evaded to tell you anything apart from fobbing you off with panic attacks or depression. So then we go forward to April, where you actually had to catch a taxi. You had to actually order a taxi to go to your GP because you couldn't get there any other way. And I think this is another thing too I want to mention to our viewers and listeners who are watching now and seeing that obviously you're having to use oxygen at the moment. And that oxygen machine has been purchased at your expense of thousands of pounds, because the NHS simply have not been giving you any of the help, even up until now, even up until we're speaking today. So when you went in the taxi to the GP and you were jaundiced and you were breathless, you said to the GP, basically, didn't you, "Believe me, listen to me." What did your GP react to that?
Honestly, Debbie, I was so ill. I'd missed out on like 2 family holidays. I hadn't been driving for months. So I got to the GP. Eyeballs were yellow for days. I was just in agony. I felt like I was dying, is the only way I can sum it up. And I stumbled into the GP office, and he looked at me, and I could see that he was genuinely worried at this point because I looked so ill. And I just said to the GP, I said, "You've got to help me." I said, "I feel like I'm dying." I said, "If you don't do something," I said, "I'm going to die." And he took my SATs, the usual blood pressure and, my oxygen SATs, and, they was fairly reasonable. And of course, because I was super fit, I wasn't, I fell within the normal realms of heart rate. My heart rate was only in the 80s or 90s, where previously it would have been half that, but that doesn't flag up because you're normal. However, my GP did look at me, and I told him I could see how breathless I was. He said, "I think you should go to A&E." And I said to him, "I can't go back." I said, "I'm sick of like going to A&E and being told like, here's some antidepressants." I said, "I can't put myself through it." I said, "I don't feel well enough to go and sit there for hours and be told that again." So my GP did tell me to go to A&E, but I was so ill, Debbie. I didn't go to A&E. I should have done, but I didn't. If my doctor couldn't find anything, and he wasn't prepared to write me a letter to, back anything up, So I went home, and I lasted about another 4 to 6 weeks, and then I collapsed on the 28th of May. Yeah.
Your nephew found you at home, didn't you? Your nephew came home and found you collapsed on the floor, and obviously dialed 999. An ambulance was called. you were rushed into hospital. You couldn't speak. You kind of woke up in a bit of a kind of semi-consciousness and found yourself parked in a hospital corridor, I think, at that time. And then you were moved to the cardiac ward. And this is where it all gets even more traumatic, because I believe that you were in so much pain, so much pain. The staff told you to shut up.
Yeah, I was getting told to shut up, Debbie. So all I remember is I was on a corridor for 2 days. They thought I'd had a stroke when I read my notes, because I couldn't hold my left arm and my left leg up. But eventually they realised I didn't have a stroke, and because of my history of my heart, they put me on a cardiac ward. I was screaming out in pain. I was just never been in pain like it, and I've still been in pain to this day with my chest since. But yeah, because I was screaming out in pain, and they couldn't get the pain under control with IV paracetamol at first and IV morphine. They just kept telling me to shut up. They were saying, you can't be in that much pain because you're able to scream out. If you were in that much pain, you wouldn't be able to scream, was what they were telling me. Yeah, so.
And they were wanting
then,
to. Do you want to take a minute, Adam? Do you want to take a minute?
No, it's fine.
Because
It's fine.
I know how traumatic this is, and I know how difficult. And I need everybody watching to please realise how difficult this has been for Adam, not just physically to talk out, but also his self-respect, his pride, and that you're doing this for everyone else. Because during this stay in hospital, they tried to discharge you, and you said, I'm not fit enough to be discharged. I'm not well enough to go home. And you actually argued, didn't you, with the consultant and said, I want a lung scan. Give me a lung scan. And the doctor or the consultant kind of fobbed you off and said, oh, well, it won't be any good. But if it will shut you up kind of thing, we'll do one. So you went for this lung scan because you were convinced there was something wrong. And then a junior doctor comes back to you, not the consultant. You never saw the consultant again, I don't think. The junior doctor comes back to you and says, oh, I'm really sorry. I'm afraid there are some pulmonary emboli that we can see. And for those of you listening that don't know what pulmonary emboli are, it's little clots, or big clots in your case, in the lungs, which was extremely worrying. So then they said they put you back in the wicker basket, didn't they? And they passed you across to somebody, a respiratorial consultant. So now, yet again, you're being fobbed off to another consultant. But of course, the Queen's Jubilee halted everything. So you went home and you just waited again. How long did you wait for, Adam?
Yeah, so sorry, yeah. So yeah, I had 3 big PEs on my lungs, Debbie. They weren't just small, they were huge. I had 3 areas of non-perfusion, 3 large perfusion deficits in my lungs, which essentially they described as my lungs being dead. So they'd been dead for a certain amount of time. And I had hundreds of small emboli on my lungs as well. So yeah, it wasn't just one little blood clot. So there was a battle. Cardiology couldn't get rid of me fast enough. Never saw the consultant again, who told me it was in my head and anxiety. Respiratory then diagnosed me with pericarditis and inflammation on my heart as well, while I was on the respiratory ward. Had a horrendous few days on there. Put on a side room on my own. Crashed trolley. Thought I was dying. Horrendous time. Never want to ever think about it again. I'm grateful for every day since that experience. Every day that I wake up, I'm very grateful for since then. It was very frightening. But anyway, they couldn't really get my pain under control. And then, saying to me, basically calling me soft again. Tried to pump me full of all kinds of strong, heavy duty medications, still not really helping me. Couldn't walk to the toilet. Or I could, but not consistently. Some days they were having to wash me, but still told me I was hogging a hospital bed and I didn't need to be here, and basically kicked me out. So yeah, I was very, very angry at this point, but they kicked me out and kicked me out to home. Couldn't lie flat in bed because I was still getting all the fits. By this point, I was trying to rest on the couch in the living room, but propping myself up on a 45-degree angle just to try and sit down. And at that point, that's when I just, because of the fiasco in the hospital and them trying to kick me out and messing about with all the medication. They put me on blood thinners, and they took me off them. I decided to pay for a private consultation on my lungs, which my wife was present on as well, just to get a second opinion, because I just thought, these are a bunch of clowns, these people now, absolute clowns.
And this was a consultant at the Brompton, wasn't it? And I think what shocked me was this consultant said to you that you were the 239th person that he'd seen like you.
Yes, Debbie. So straight away, I thought I was dying still. I still felt that bad. So my first question to him was, am I dying? And he said to me, because I said, I want to tell my children if I am. And he said, well, not imminently from a lung perspective. So then we went on, and I said to him, well, what's going on with me? I said, you've seen all my scans, you've seen all my history. I said, I've been asking people if this is vaccination injury. I said, in your opinion, is this vaccination injury? And he said, yes, it is. He said, it's categorically vaccine injury. He said, you're about the 239th or 240th person I've seen with very similar injuries to yourself. And this is just at one hospital. And this was the Brompton in London, which is one of the leading chest hospitals in the country. It's actually, I think, in the top 20 in the world, Debbie. So, these consultants there, they wouldn't say something like that lightly. He then recommended, he was really worried about my heart. He said, you're on the blood thinners. We had quite a detailed conversation about the prognosis for my lungs and what that might mean or what it might not mean, because he obviously can't promise anything. And then he suggested I see one of his colleagues, which I then proceeded again to pay privately. I think it was £500 or £450 to see his colleague about my heart.
I'm going to have to bring this up now because it's utterly shocking. Because after all of this, you get home and you're waiting for referrals, and there's a knock at the door. And at the door is social services, who seem to have concerns about the number of ambulances that you've been using and asking you not to use ambulances. And you invited them in and had a chat with them, didn't you, Adam?
Yeah, I was absolutely shocked. And then it's two nurses. I mean, I remember one of them's name because he's still in contact with me now. It's such a nice gentleman and caring. I'm going to give him a mention, Rob. So Rob and his colleague came in, and they could see that I was trying to sleep on the living room. They could see that I looked like Walking Death, and they told me why they were there. They said, it costs X amount of money. I think they said it costs £1,000 every time someone calls an ambulance out to the government. So they said it's their job to make sure people aren't calling ambulances out inappropriately, and obviously rightly so, because I wouldn't want to call an ambulance out if it meant that another person didn't get an ambulance and they died. So I totally took serious what they were saying to me. And then they assessed me. They listened to my story. They looked at my medical evidence. They had some discharge stuff with me by this time. And they turned around and went, we're so sorry. They said, again, they sort of said, in not too many words, they sort of said that they'd seen a few other people similar to me and were hearing stories of similar things. And then they gave me their absolute full support. It absolutely touched me. They turned around to me and went, you need to stop taking chances, because I was at this point, Debbie, where I could have easily been in an ambulance every single night. My heart arrhythmia, my chest pain was so bad. I literally, at that point in my mind, it was like, I was seriously thinking, well, would I rather die at home and be near my mother and my family and at least be comfortable, because there was that stress from being in hospital and being told it was all in my head and the amount of visits to hospital. I didn't want to go near another hospital again. So to phone an ambulance out was like, it was literally, I'd only phone an ambulance out because they'd have access to a defib. That was where I was at this point. But they said to me, no, just phone an ambulance out. Don't be stupid. And then, of course, at that point, I kept getting, I was another bad again. Like, every day was just torture. I didn't know whether I was going to still be here. And I actually ended up back on, I had to call another ambulance in between, and then they took me straight through to HDU. And at this point then, obviously it was on my medical record then from seeing this guy in London that it was vaccine injury, and then this time they completely treated me like totally different. They were all just coming up to me saying, "Yeah, we're really sorry. Yeah, this seems to be a thing, vaccine injury." So, we were in July of 22 now, so almost 12 months later, they're obviously starting to see a few people filtering through with things that are obviously on the suspicion index. So they sort of finally acknowledged, but they still didn't have a clue what to do.
So at last, you've got acknowledgement and you've got people believing you and their attitudes are changing. So everybody would think that's good. Then at least we're moving forward. But that wasn't the case, was it? Because you're up in the Northwest, and a lot of these appointments are at specialist units at the Brompton in London, and that involve a lot of travelling. And all of a sudden now, because you are vaccine injured and they're acknowledging that it was the vaccine, you're too sick to travel. So your GP refuses to organise travel for you to get you to the appointments that you need to go to because you literally can't get out of the house, and you've run out of funds, you've spent all your savings, you've lost your home, you've lost everything that you had, including your career, and now your GP's saying, I'm sorry, you're too sick to travel and I'm not going to use my budget to organise transport for you. I mean, is that, I did understand that correctly, didn't I, Adam?
You did, Debbie. That's exactly what happened. I was that unwell at this point, Debbie. I had to get somebody to advocate with my GP for me because I physically couldn't, the trauma of trying to phone up and being fobbed off and being told this kind of stuff. I was so ill. That's exactly what happened. Essentially, sorry, I was in Warrington Hospital on HDU. They said I was too ill. They felt I needed a coronary angiogram, but they felt I was too ill and too unsafe to do it. So they said they'd give me drugs for microvascular angina and to try them as a trial and see me in a few months' time. So then I'd seen the private guy at the Brompton. He'd written a letter to my GP and said, this guy needs to come up as an urgent inpatient to see me, and I'll, get to the bottom of what's going on. I'll try my best. My GP got the letter, ignored it. I phoned up the GP to get this appointment, or somebody did for me, because I wasn't well enough to go to the surgery. GP refused on 2 occasions to come out to my house. Their answer, they'd sent me half a litre of morphine through the day before. That was their solution, up your morphine by 3 times. Great, thank you, GP. I'll say at this point, though, the only thing in defence to the GP is, because I was living at my mum's, my GP had changed. But anyway, so GP was refusing me because he'd have to pay for an ambulance out of his budget. And he wasn't prepared to pay for me to go to London. And his scenario was, I'll refer you to a local cardiologist as an outpatient at Wigan and Leigh, which I'm not being funny, like the chances of Wigan and Leigh cardiologists being interested in vaccine injury are about 0. So I was absolutely furious. I was fighting for my life, Debbie, and I was getting some absolute idiot disregarding a letter from one of the top cardiologists in the country saying that I needed inpatient treatment and inpatient investigation on the NHS. My GP was thinking of his budget, like it was his money. And at that point, Debbie, I had to get my MP involved. I had to phone the ICS, which is the equivalent of the old CCGs, which basically are in charge of distributing the money to the GPs. So if you like, almost like the bosses of the GPs. And I also got back in touch with with Rob at the high intensity ambulance unit, who'd visited me and his partner about me calling the inappropriate number of ambulances out. And I told them what happened, and he was absolutely shocked. Him and his colleague actually visited my GP on my behalf and lobbied on my behalf and said, this man is really, really sick. On what grounds you refusing it? And he again told them verbally that he wasn't prepared to use his budget for me. And then I spoke to Rob again, and Rob said, look, I'll try and do some things. I know people in the ambulance service. I'll try and do some things my end to help you. And eventually that's, God bless them, that's what they did. by this time I was known to a few local ambulance crews. People knew my story. Paramedics had also told me stories about how one of the crew, one of their colleagues, had been affected by the vaccine and had heart trouble and still wasn't back at work. They were telling me how many young people they were picking up with heart trouble, which they'd never done before, and strokes. So the majority of the ambulance crews, 9 out of 10 of the ambulance crews, were all telling me this was a real thing, and they were all really sympathetic. So off the back of that, eventually I had a nightmare getting my GP to actually write the referral to London, to the hospital. So when I convinced him I could get an ambulance, he eventually did that. It took another 2 weeks. It took 2 weeks of threats, to be honest, not things that it's nice to have to do when you're not well. And in the meantime, Rob and Co and people at the ambulance, the Northwest Ambulance crew, knew about me, said to me, as soon as you get your date through, phone us the day before and don't worry, we will get you to that hospital. And God bless those people, Debbie, because without good people like that, then I just dread to think, because, I appreciate there's a system in the NHS and there has to be a system for a reason because the system's bombarded. But, as an autonomous practitioner or any human being or qualified clinician, there has to be an element of common sense. And thankfully, those people went to battle for me, and I'm forever grateful for them.
And I think we'd echo that. And a big shout out to Rob, you know who you are, and to your colleagues for getting Adam the help that he so desperately needs. Because I need to remind people watching that it's not just the health system, Adam, that you've had to navigate. It's everything. You've lost everything. You've had to navigate DWP because you've had no income, because you've lost your job. So you've had to micromanage and fight for everything. So to wrap everything up to current day, to where we are now, eventually you got an appointment and you went and you had bike tests, which they had to stop because you were so unwell and because the readings were going off the scale. But eventually a consultant wanted to talk to you, didn't they, about what your diagnosis was? But they wanted to tell you themselves. And it ended up that, I think, was he on a golf course when he rang you to give you your diagnosis of what he thought was actually wrong with you?
Yes, Debbie. So the treatment I got at the Royal Brompton is, is out of this world. It's, yeah. So what happened was, obviously, I was in hospital at Brompton for 4 weeks, many, many scans and investigations and blood tests, etc. Obviously, the man that I was under, the consultant was under, is a very important man and very busy man. Obviously, not just got me as a patient. So the MDT had to meet with all the evidence, and he was actually delivering a conference in Barcelona. So he was about to get on a plane at the airport. The last week of my stay there, I was getting very frustrated because I was still poorly. Obviously, I've not made a miraculous recovery. And I wanted to know what was going on and why I wasn't getting any answers off the ward doctors and stuff. And it was clear that, not saying they were keeping something from me, but there was a reason why they were sort of avoiding me a little bit on their ward rounds. And, I don't think they knew what was going on with me. So I sort of started to kick off a bit saying what's going on, because they were on about me going home and I felt like I didn't know what was going on. So the consultant, I won't name him because the only reason I won't name him, I mean, if people can ask him, can speak to me privately, I just know that this consultant's bombarded trying to help people like me, because he's one of the only consultants that knows what's going on with this. And I don't want to land him in any trouble at this stage. So anyway, he phoned me from the airport and said, we've had this MDT meeting about you. I've got what we think's going on with you. It's not what we expected. Obviously you've got a lot of things going on. You're a little bit, worse than what we possibly thought. Sorry to tell you, you've got myopathy. So he said, I'll give you 10 minutes to let that sink in. He said, and I'll give you a call back when I get through passport control or whatever he was at the airport, or he could sit somewhere quieter to speak to me. So I think he expected me to know what that was, to be honest. And, I must admit, it's not something that I come across in professional sport, that diagnosis. So I didn't actually know what it was. So he gave me 10 minutes. And then he called me back and yeah, he just sort of told me what the future plan is really for me going forward in terms of what investigations I need, and potentially, how it's not probably a great prognosis really, to be quite frank.
And I think that's where we are now, isn't it, Adam? Because the consultant felt that it was this serious that he had to tell you himself, which is why he took time out. And sorry, I thought it was a golf course, but it was the airport. But why he felt it was so urgent to speak to you, because it is potentially a critical illness. Myopathy is disease of the heart muscle. And as we're talking now, Adam, you're still waiting for appointments. You're still waiting for help. You are now and you could be waiting till after Christmas. And this is the message because that you wanted to put out for other people so much. You're waving red flags. Every single person that we speak to with vaccine injuries is so incredibly brave, because I know how exhausting this is today, which is why we're going to sign off in a minute and say goodbye to our viewers, and hopefully that everyone will share this video, because people like you need help now. We need Dame June Rain, Dr. Henrietta Hughes, Baroness Cumberledge, Dr. Alison Cave, Professor Sir Munir Mohammed. We need all of them to have a conversation with all of you, because it is quite utterly shocking. Adam, I want to thank you so much for being so brave and speaking out. And I know this has been completely exhausting for you. But as always, it's your voice that we need to hear. And I would like to give you the last word. So, Adam, if you've got a message for the professionals and for the public out there, what would it be?
For the professionals, Debbie, is I'm absolutely disgusted. It's horrendous how they're treating human beings that were told to do the right thing. I was told to do the right thing. I'm a professional person. I'm not misinformation. You're completely ignoring us, our government, the people that are supposed to serve us. June Rain, you're supposed to be the chief of the MHRA, June. I watched you laugh at us. I watched you laugh when somebody asked you a question today. I put questions into the board meeting that I attended, a public board meeting today. You laughed at us with disrespect. There's enough evidence, June. There's evidence on the ONS government website. 1 in 301 people after the COVID vaccine are dying within 45 days. It's irrefutable evidence. Yet you're telling me that it's all been investigated. I put a question to you. Show me evidence what you're investigating this data. Make it transparent. You didn't answer the question. It's inhumane what I'm going through and what others are going through. And you think that we can just be ignored? I'm telling you this, June, and your colleagues, we ain't going to go away. And you can have it when I die, you can have that on your mind. And if you can sleep at night, well, you disgust me. You absolutely disgust me how we've been treated. I would never treat another human being like that. I just hope you sleep well at night, because you know what's going on. You know what's going on. We never got told about the AstraZeneca vaccine, why it was pulled, so you know it's dangerous because you wouldn't have pulled it. Yet you haven't got the decency to come up and admit that you were wrong. You'd rather just sweep us under the carpet. I'll tell you, I'm not going to go away for all those people that are vaccinated until my last breath. You're going to hear from us. And for anyone else who's suffering vaccine injury, I know how it feels, and I'm telling you, you've got to start speaking up, because these people don't want us to speak up. They want to sweep us under the carpet, they want to forget about us, and they want us to die. And that's how they're treating us, and it's that simple. So I beg you, if you're suffering, don't take any more crap off these people. Speak to me. I will advise you on what tests you need. I'll advise you how to deal with these people as best I can. But people in this country, we need to start speaking up. And I'm just asking any of the members of the public who, even if, you've not been vaccinated, and I'm not trying to be anti-vax, I'm just asking you to support us as human beings, of just just please support us. So, you know, I've contacted mainstream media, and if it wasn't for Debbie on this outlet, I get told off mainstream media, and I can give evidence that they're not allowed to publish my story. They're not allowed to publish other people's stories. We're supposed to just be forgotten about, Debbie, and no, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to let that happen.